The future of conflict is not just related to mainland Pakistan, but Pakistan's borders will see more violence in the near future because the peripheries are unstable and Pakistan is in the middle. And even internally, Pakistan's political dynamics are, at war with each other. Unless there is internal stability, external stability cannot be guaranteed. And simultaneously, if external stability, instability exists, internal stability will also be hampered. In terms of when we look at the trajectory on how things have moved forward since the Taliban have taken over Afghanistan, August 15, 2021, there's been a slow, gradual process that has been exacerbated by certain incidents, and we see a total collapse of the relationship between two countries. Since 2021, initially, it was thought that when the Afghan Taliban take over Kabul, one of the bigger problems for Pakistan, which is the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, would end. How would that end? There were certain plans that were there. At that time, as you mentioned, General Faiz Hamid, when he was there, it was thought that probably one of the proposals from the Afghan Taliban was to actually sit across the table, end this entire, war narrative. And for those that were fighting against the state of Pakistan, they no longer had the certain ideal or that certain ideology that was built up around the presence of American and international troops in Afghanistan. So it was thought initially that once the Americans moved out, this entire premise of jihadist ideology in the region would collapse. However, that did not happen. We went through a phase of almost 13 to 14 months of negotiations, which ended up in a more drastic situation where we've now seen the trajectory of violence climb up slowly and gradually. Last year, when we look at the comparative statistics for 2023, in comparison to yesteryears, we see that there's an increase of almost 45% in terms of violence. That includes about 1,600 smaller or larger attacks just in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa alone, and some 430 plus in Balochistan alone. A total cumulative figure of almost 2,600 something attacks, which is a large number for a country that's almost been fighting against militant ideologies and groups and has a formative counter-terrorism ideology, and that has been battling in this region for almost 20 years now. Somehow, when we look at it in the retrospect, we feel that those were all miscalculations, and the situation that we find ourselves now in, it was actually a bad reading of the situation back then. Because the Afghan Taliban have very clearly stated that they cannot and will not take any actions against the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. They've offered two different succinct models to actually move forward with. The first phase was the negotiations, and the second phase was the resettlement of the Tehreek-e-Taliban away from the borders of Pakistan, for which they were demanding for almost about 10 billion Pakistani rupees. And none of that has worked out, and we've seen multiple attacks taking place in Pakistani territory. When Pakistan went and launched these airstrikes in Afghanistan, this was the second time. The last time when this happened was when the peace talks failed, and there was a drastic increase in violence in KP and the rest of Pakistan as well. We even watched suicide bombing in Islamabad. And since then, there have been various methods that have been tried. The diplomatic failure actually resulted in the form that Pakistan had to actually go and carry out an intelligence-based operation in the borderlands of Afghanistan, which is not unprecedented, but obviously the escalation that we've seen in terms of border after that was unusual in terms of the previous attacks as well. The situation has relatively calmed down in the last 24 to 48 hours when we look at it. The four border arteries that surround Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, two of them are, they have reopened. One of them was now closed. There are negotiations that are going on right now, currently engaging tribal elders and political leaderships on both sides to sort of end this. But in order to find a larger solution in terms of the question, which is the larger question in the room, on actually what happens next, I don't think that there is a solution right now that has been talked about. It is still believed by Pakistan that the Taliban in Afghanistan will rein in, the Afghan Taliban. But even after that, we've seen, a bombing that's taken place today in Dera Ismail Khan, in which there have been casualties, and the particular targeted again once again is the security forces of Pakistan. Simultaneously, we've also seen an uptake in violence in Afghanistan. We've seen a suicide bombing happening in their religious and ideological, hometown, which is Kandahar. So the situation for now is pretty volatile, but there are various backdoor channeling that is taking place right now, and we know that there are efforts to sort of de-escalate as well as to start a political process that focuses on economy and development, and also focuses on counter-terrorism measures, on how Pakistan can work along with Afghanistan so that terrorism does not engulf both countries. Pakistan carved a certain narrative that it was not just the Afghan illegal immigrants that were living in Pakistan, but rather it was against everyone. But obviously, the larger chunk of that population post August 15 and even since the 1980s that were residing in Pakistan have been Afghans. Once the Peshawar bombing took place in the police lines, in which there were heavy casualties, there was an apex committee meeting in which it was decided that a delegation would be sent into Afghanistan. And we saw senior intelligence and military leadership, along with the defense minister back then, going and talking over to the Afghan authorities and warning them that if actually they did not rein in the Pakistani Taliban, then there would be drastic measures that would be taken, which included stringent measures on the border, as well as repatriation of refugees. And if all that did not work, then calling back all diplomats from Afghanistan. We're somehow close to that phase where we've seen the extreme measures being adopted right now. If we talk about the larger scenario on how this would develop, I don't think that right now there is any willingness from the Afghan authorities. Rather, we see further bellicosity from across the border against Pakistan and its political as well as military leadership. And those are very evident in the statements that have been given by the spokesperson of the interim Afghan government, as well as from the defense minister as well. And we've seen multiple Afghan propaganda outlets blaming Pakistan for whatever situation is developing within Afghanistan as well. But simultaneously, we do not see a situation that would arise in which we see a positive sort of a networking through which this conundrum that has been caused by the Tehreek-e-Taliban, that it can be resolved. Rather, we've seen that once the Prime Minister actually gave out a statement in which he said that the borders were our red lines and the Afghan Taliban should respect that, and Pakistan would not tolerate terrorism on its soil, particularly exported from Afghanistan. We've seen the Tehreek-e-Taliban actually issue a repartee to the Prime Minister's statement. And we've also seen multiple statements coming in on international media outlets where their spokesperson has been speaking equally in that tone as well. So for now, the escalation is there. In terms of violence, it is reduced. But obviously, the rhetoric of animosity still exists. And I think it will require a larger process, not just in terms between Pakistan and Afghanistan, but obviously a larger diplomatic effort from the global community to actually reduce this. The Pakistani authorities have had this certain assumption that various militant factions and actors simultaneously that they've had a certain narrative that they've been used as proxies by other countries that are against Pakistan in different ways. And that narrative has sort of seeped into this phase of violence as well. We've seen the name of our neighboring countries being named again and again in public discourses by politicians, as well as social media handles that are operated by the state. But in terms of when you refer to Balochistan, we've seen not just an escalation of violence, we've seen a number of incidents that actually began just before elections. And there's been a trickle-down effect of all of that. Gawadar's attack is not just an isolated moment. We've seen multiple attacks in Afghanistan, in Balochistan, that have taken place previously. And we've not just seen the Baloch insurgent part also, but we've also seen the TTP activated in Balochistan. It's interesting actually because there's the Iranian problem over there, and then there is the Afghan problem. Balochistan's situation is more complicated because it shares borders with both these countries. And before the episode with Afghanistan, we have an episode on the border between Pakistan and Iran as well. So it cannot be looked at in isolation, All these incidents are connected with one another. What next, when you ask? I think that the Pakistani state, for the first part, would require a major consensus amongst the political parties as well as, the political workers of these parties who actually frame the ground opinion. The animosity that exists between Khyber Pakhtunkhwa's provincial government and the federal government is a loophole in that policy measure. Simultaneously, I think in case of Balochistan, the political landscape is smaller but more complicated. And I think that one of the moves to bring in the People Party, in Balochistan and give them a larger role is to actually develop that kind of consensus that actually opens up doors for insurgent groups to lay down weapons. We've seen the Chief Minister of Balochistan, the newly elected Chief Minister of Balochistan, actually publicly giving a statement that asking people to lay down arms and surrender to the state, and obviously opening up a more amnesty sort of a scheme for them. Whether that works out or whether that doesn't work out, I think that has to do a lot of with internal politics, but as well as how the situation develops in the region as well, because none of these incidents of violence can be seen without the larger picture on how the situation is developing, not just in Afghanistan, but also in the war in Ukraine, what happens with Iran's relationship with the global community, and simultaneously in what is happening in the Central Asian republics as well.